So where do you even start when painting your first 1/35th scale model figure? And why might painting this Tamiya World War II US Infantry soldier dark blue be a good idea? Well, in this video we're going to look at how to take an unpainted model like this and then turn it into this, so I can use it in a small diorama that I have planned. So in the previous video we looked at the beginner's guide on how to build and prep your model figure to get it ready for painting. So having mounted both the model as well as the weapon on a painting handle like this, we're ready to prime it. Now if you are new to making models or just getting back into it, what priming is and why you do it and how it differs to normal paint can be confusing. It sure took me a little while to get my head around it when I started building models again. Essentially, primer paint is specifically formulated so that it grips to a surface tighter than standard paint and gives you a nice even surface to paint on. Now this is a different thing to standard modelling paint, even those that are marketed as base layer paints, for example. Do you actually need to do it? Well, it depends. Now on some plastics, painting straight onto the plastic surface is completely fine with certain paints. Whereas surfaces like metal or resin can be tricky to paint on or even get the paint to stick to. Now also other paints just do better over a primer. For example, when I was asking Vallejo some questions a little while back, they recommended always priming before using their paints. But the top trick is using it when you have multiple types of materials in one model. For example, you're converting or kit bashing a model and you use plastic, resin, epoxy putty or even paper in your build. If you prime it first, then it gives you one surface type as a foundation to paint on. Now there are loads of different types of primer which gives you the option for applying the primer with a brush, an aerosol can or even an airbrush. And you will find a bunch of videos on this channel reviewing different primers. And I'll put a link up here in the corner as well as down in the description, so if you want to check those out later. But today I'm going to use the AK Interactive's grey primer and microfiller through my airbrush. As a lack of primer, I'm going to make sure that I open a window for ventilation and use a P3 mask when spraying this stuff. Now one coat is normally enough and I'm going to let it dry fully overnight. Now another benefit of priming before you start adding colour is that it shows up anything you missed when you're building the model. For example, there is a slight gap around this left shoulder that I missed when I was building it. You can use model filler or putty to fill small gaps like these, but today I'm going to use sprue goo. Now sprue goo is a homemade concoction of cutting up leftover plastic sprue into tiny chunks and then dropping them into a 3/4 roughly empty bottle of Tamiya extra thin glue. Now the glue partially melts the plastic, so you can use a silicone sculpting tool like this or an old paintbrush to paint it into the gaps. Now the solvent then evaporates, leaving just the plastic behind, filling that gap. Now if you do have lots of filling like this to do, you can give it another coat of primer to make sure all is well, but this little bit should be okay to carry on with. Now as usual, this video is not sponsored in any way, but if there is a bit of kit that you like the look of, then I've put a resource list with all the links to where you can check it out for yourself down in the description. Now if you'd like to support me and the channel so I can make more videos as you explore the crazy world of miniature modelling, then please consider using those links, as well as hitting the like button on this video and others if you want, and sharing this video with anyone you think might also enjoy it. Right, let's go play with some paint. Now first I'm going to start off with a coat of Tamiya Sea Blue. Now this is a nice dark blue and I'm going to dilute this ever so slightly with a couple of drops of Vallejo airbrush thinner, so it flows through the airbrush that little bit easier. Now you may be wondering why I am painting this dark blue. Well, you will see in a minute, but this is a trick I picked up while painting busts such as the Roman legionary that I painted a while back. Now once that has dried, I then picked up the Tamiya Deck Tan and sprayed that from above as a general zenithal highlight. Now this does a couple of things. One, it shows up the detail much better. It certainly helps to see what you are painting, but it also gives you an idea where the highlights and the shadows fall. Now if you are new to painting this sort of thing, then that little bit of a guide really helps. Okay, so zenithal highlighting is not unusual, but you will mostly see it white over black. So why the dark blue and the tan instead? Well, basically because the dark blue gives you that shadow and a great base for skin tones, as well as clothing and equipment, but it's not as harsh as black. Likewise, the deck tan is not as harsh as pure white. Ironically, both colours are warmer than black and white, so it seems to give it a little bit more life when you paint the colours over the top. Well, that's the theory anyway. Let's see how it works out. Then let me know what you think. On these models, the heads are directly moulded onto the body rather than coming separately. So I'm going to start with getting some skin tones down first. Now I, along with many people, find that skin tones are often the hardest part to get right when painting models. It is a great challenge and I'm still working on it, but one thing that makes it a whole load easier is these. These are binocular loupes, and being able to see what you're actually painting and where you're putting the brush can be an absolute game changer. Now you can see how these compare to other magnifier options in this video right here. But before I finish the face, I'm going to start painting the uniform. The reason being is because through bitter experience, I've learned that painting the detail onto the face and then painting the surrounding uniform, etc., is just asking for the brush to slip and smear green paint over the beautifully painted face that I had just finished. It really tends to spoil your day. To make life a little easier, I'm going to try out this World War II US Army Soldier Uniform Colours paint set from AK Interactive. Now, I've just bought this set especially for this project. Now, as all these sets do, it has some beautiful painted examples demonstrating where to use the colours. In this set, it has 6 paints designed to replicate World War II era US Army uniform colours. And this is the first time I've used these, so it'll be interesting to see how they come out. For the trousers, I'm going to start with a dark green before mixing in a little bit of Vallejo blue to paint the shadows and recesses in the cloth. Then mixing a little US olive base into the original dark green, I then pick out the highlights. Now, a sneaky trick, or another way you can do this, is if you are just learning to paint shadows and midtones and highlights, is to take advantage of that zenithal highlight we did back at the start with the deck tan over the dark blue. So if you start with the dark green on your palette and mix in a tiny amount of blue to make a slightly darker green, slightly bluer dark green, then paint all the darkest areas with that colour first. Then use the neat dark green and paint the areas which are not solid tan, and then mix some US olive base into the dark green to make a highlight colour and paint that over the areas that are left. Now, as long as you start the next colour before the previous colour is dry, they will naturally start to blend together. Now, as long as the differences between the colours are not too great a jump, then it can work really well on a model like this in this scale. Now, moving on to the jacket. Now, I do not claim to be an expert on historical US military uniforms, but I've seen reference photos of these jackets in a wide range of shades of khaki, ranging from green to a more yellowy colour. So as we are painting these being led by the rule of cool, rather than a strict historical accuracy, I'm going to try and replicate that more yellower khaki, which will also hopefully add a bit more visual interest. So to start with, I'm going to put a base coat down to the field drab over the jacket with the highlights in ochre khaki. Next, I use canvas tone on the webbing straps and pouches. Now, one of the challenges here is that the canvas webbing is a very similar yellow colour, but I've got a cunning plan for that. The next step, whilst that is drying, is to use Vallejo model colour German black brown to put a dark brown base layer on the boots, before picking out the raised areas with the AK Interactive's red brown. Now, I can add some more wear and tear to the boots, but I think I'll save that for when I can put these guys into a diorama and I can set them into that environment. But going back to the jacket, while I have taken down that brighter drab colour with a wash made out of that Vallejo German black brown, it's still looking a bit too yellow. So I'm going to break out some enamel paints. Now this is AK Interactive's Winter Streaking Grime. This is an enamel product which I often use for weathering and making things look grimy and worn. But in this example, that is not what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to use a small brush, not one of my best ones, but a small brush to apply a thin layer of Winter Streaking Grime over a dry surface of the jacket. Then, after letting it slightly dry, I started to very gently remove the streaking grime with the tip of some scrunched up kitchen towel, dampened in clean spirit. Now, according to AK Interactive, the best stuff to use is their white spirit, but I don't have any of that at the minute. But I find that clean spirit still works fairly well. It also works out a lot cheaper and doesn't smell as strongly as white spirit. But what you find is, as the streaking grime was applied over dry acrylic paint, the streaking grime ever so slightly stains the underlying paint, as well as pick out some of the fine detail, even after it is largely removed. The trick here is that winter streaking grime is a more greeny brown than the standard streaking grime, which is more of a brown colour. Now this means that the winter streaking grime acts as a filter for that more yellow drab colour to give it more of a darker khaki colour, while still getting that yellower tone coming through once it's dry. The next stage of this project is building a small diorama to set these guys in. Now I'm going to strip this right back to basics to help you build your first scale model diorama and get a great result in this video right here. If you like that, found that useful, please bash that like button and share it across your social media. And I'll see you for the next project.